Welcome to LabMinutes.com and our first video in our lab video series on Cisco Ice 1.3. You can find a complete list of the Ice video on our website by clicking on the link above and sign up for our newsletters to receive the latest video updates. In this video, we will walk you through an installation of Cisco Ice 1.3. Although we kind of have gone through this process for both Ice 1.1 and 1.2, Ice 1.3 has introduced a new model of implementing Ice VM using the OVA files in addition to using the ISO. And if you've already dealt with installing other Cisco technologies that use OVA like the VNMCs or the Prime Security Manager servers, this would be nothing new to you. For those of you who are not familiar with the OVA, so OVA file is basically a VM image with all the VM resources like a CPU, memory, disk space, predefined, so you don't need to worry about choosing those resources for your installation. But what you need to do is to choose the OVA file that reflects the size of your ICE appliance. And we kind of touched upon this back in the ISE 1.2 VMware installation videos when we discussed about the VM sizing and how you should size your VM as if they were appliances according to the size of your deployment. At the first customer ship, Cisco provides 3 different OVA files for you to choose from: the eval, the Cisco 3415 appliance, and the Cisco 3495 appliance. In this video, we will do a fresh install of Ice VM from an eval OVA, so you guys can see what the procedure looks like. And if you want the flexibility of choosing VM resources for whatever reason, the ISO image is still available, and we will go through the VM creation using the ISO here as well, although it's going to be kind of a repeat of what we did already back in the ISE 1.1 and 1.2 videos. For our lab setup, we're going to be concentrating on installing a Cisco Ice 1.3 on a secondary admin monitoring node with the name LM-ICE2, which we will later on add to our deployment. And this guy here is going to be on a VLAN 32, the IP of .103. And on that same VLAN, we already have our primary admin monitoring node, also running Ice 1.3, LM-ICE1 at the IP of .102, as well as a Windows 2008 domain controller, although we're not going to start looking into those yet in this video. So before you jump into your installation, there are some prerequisites that you need to take care of. First of all, you need to make sure that you have the VMware ESXi server installed and running the supported version, possibly version 4.x or 5.x. Then you need to download the Ice 1.3, whether it's OVA or ISO, from the Cisco website. And here I already have the download page pulled up. And if you look at the list of the file under Ice 1.3, you will see that in addition to some of the compliance module, there's an upgrade bundle. If you want to perform an upgrade from the previous version, again, check for the compatibility upgrade path. And what we're looking for here is the OVA files right here. There are 3 of them. The first one is the eval OVA that supports up to 100 endpoints, and that should be used for labbing or evaluation purposes only. Then you have the OVA file that simulate the SNS 3415 appliance and also the SNS 3495 appliance. Right, and if you still want to proceed with an ISO install, then you can see that the ISO image is also available right here as well. And one thing that you might want to note that the size of the ISO is actually quite a bit smaller than these OVAs. And also, if you want to proceed with the OVA file, I would recommend to have a high-speed connection from the computer where the OVA file is located to the ESXi server, as you will be uploading, as you can see here, almost 6 gig worth of file in real time during installation. As opposed to if you were to use the .iso file, then you can upload the file to your ESXi data store prior to the installation. The next thing that you need to make sure that you have set up is a DNS server with the A records created for all of your ICE nodes, and make sure that all of your name of your I appliances are resolvable. You also need to have a reachable NTP time server during the installation. Then you need also to have a valid default gateway IP reachable. As you see again, that we're trying to validate the reachability to the default gateway. Then on your ESXi server, you need to make sure that you have the virtualization technology enabled. Definitely has to be supported. So in order to check on that, let's go ahead and SSH to our ESXi server. I have a shortcut built into our PuTTY here already. Let's go ahead and log in. And the command that you need to enter to validate the VT is ESXCFG-info. And then you can pipe and grep and look for HV support. And if it comes back and return number 3, that means the virtualization technology is supported and enabled. If it comes back and gives you number 2, that means it is supported but disabled. So you need to go into the BIOS and enable it accordingly. And the next thing on the ESXi server they need to check on is if you're planning to use a span-based probe for the profiling, they need to make sure you enable promiscuous settings on the vSwitch that the port of the ISE server is going to be connected to. So that would be under, let me see if I can find that. So pick your vSwitch. Let's say it's we're on vSwitch 1, and under the vSwitch, highlight that, click Edit. Under Security, there is Policy Exception for promiscuous modes. Make sure they're set to Accept. Alright, then as far as sizing the VMs, as far as what OVA file to choose from, whether it's 3415 or the 3495. We kind of already discussed this back in the ISE 1.2, so we're not going to repeat it here since nothing has really changed since then. So if you're interested in how to size your ISE deployment properly, then I recommend you check out the videos SEC0181 ISE 1.2 VMware Sizing Installation. Now that you have all of your prerequisites taken care of, we're going to go ahead and begin on our ISE installation. As mentioned, we'll be using the eval OVA here. Close that out. On the vSphere client, then where you go to is under File. There's a Deploy OVF template. Now you need to make sure that you're accessing the ESXi server from the machine that you have the file, the OVA file downloaded. So here we have the file located under Desktop, ISE 1.3. Let me kind of click Browse, although the file is already selected. So right here, Desktop, ISE 1.3, and we have the eval OVA. So select on that, click Next. Do a quick review. The download size is 5.5 gig. Size on this, if you were to pick thin provisioning, then it will be 8.9. Otherwise, if you do thick, it will be 200. Then click Next. We'll give it a name. We said we'll call it LM-ISE2. Click Next. Then you pick your data store where you want your installation to take place. We're just going to pick the local data store. Click Next. Here, this is where you have to decide whether you want to do thick provision or thin provision. Just so you know that thin provision is now officially supported with the Cisco Ice 1.3 according to the install guide, but we still recommend you using thick for production, just like any other server if you can afford the disk space. But here, since we're just using it in the lab, we're just going to go ahead and pick the thin provision. Click Next, and we have to choose the network where you want the ISE to connect to. For us, it's our VLAN 32, which is a server VLAN. Click Next, and then we are almost finished with the configuration. As you can see that we didn't even have to define any kind of VM resources, as everything is already been predefined within the OVA file. So now let's go ahead and click Finish. And this process right here is going to take a while since we are uploading the image in real time to the ESXi server. So this is where the high-speed link will becomes very important here, especially if you are trying to deploy your ISE node across the WAN. So at this point, we're just going to have to wait for the deployment to complete. So go ahead and pause the video, and it comes back when our VM is ready. The deployment of the VM is now completed, so let's go and check out what has actually been defined under the OVA. So here's our LM-ISE2. Click Edit Settings. Let's just go through and look at some of the specification. The memory is 4 gig, and this is again the eval OVA. The CPU is 2 core, 1 virtual socket. We've got 4 network adapters. We're actually just going to be using 1 for the most part, but you will have the other 3 available if you would like to kind of mix it up and use different adapters for different purposes. For the hard disk space, the provision size is 200. It's thin provision, but the actual size is actually only 10 gig if you look at the background. Here, so I've got our DVD CD-ROM drive, but you can see there's no floppy since we don't really need it. Click on under the Option tab. The guest operating system set with the OVA is Linux, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6, 64 bits. And one thing that I want to mention that if you, in your production, choose whether it's 3415 or 3495 appliances OVA, then you want to make sure that your ESXi server that you deploy the OVA has sufficient hardware resources. And you can look up the hardware specification of those appliances under the ISE 1.3 hardware installation guide. And you see that those appliances actually have different hardware requirements. Actually, you have to watch out for the RAM, since there's actually a heavy RAM requirement. I think 16 gig for the 3450 and like 32 for the 3495. So just watch out for that. Now our VM is ready to be started. So click powered on, and let's bring up the console. And one thing you will see here with the OVA installation, the server is actually going to be booting right into the setup process, as opposed to the ISO, which you will see towards the end of the video. Or if you have some past experience installing the ISO, you actually have to go through some of the operating system installation. So with the OVA, it's almost like you halfway there in the process. So you can see we almost immediately get our login prompt, which we can launch the setup. So go ahead and type in setup and start going through the configuration wizard, starting with the host name. For us, it's LM-ICE2. IP address 172.16.32.103. Netmask /24. Default gateway 32.1. DNS domain is labminutes.com. Primary name server 16.32.40, and that was shown on our diagram right here, which is our Windows 2008 domain control and DNS server. 40. Secondary name server, we'll skip that. For the NTP, we're just going to point it to our default gateway, which is our switch. So 172.16.32.1. No secondary NTP. Time zone for us is US Pacific. Enable SSH service, yes. Username will keep the default admin and the password. Make sure you meet the password complexity. Uppercase, lowercase, the number. And then this is where it's trying to bring up network interface. So if you go to our command prompt and trying to do a ping 32103, and you can see it's now reachable on the network. That means our network adapter on ICE and the default gateways are functioning. So let me kill that. And you can see right here, these are the network reachability or connectivity validation that's going on. First is pinging the default gateway. Next is trying to ping the primary name server, which we have up and running. Right here, this is where our RDP session is going to right now. We are RDPing into our domain controller. Now it's trying to configure the VMware tools. And at this point, we're just going to let it run the remaining process. Probably going to take almost another up to an hour, depending on how fast your server is. So what I'm going to do is to pause the video one more time, and we'll come back once the installation is completed. Alright, so we're back, and our LM-ICE2 VM should have been successfully installed at this point. So here we have the login prompt on the console. Make sure you're able to log in using the credential you specify as part of the setup. Let's do a quick show run and make sure everything looks good. And it looks like I should do one space at a time, so you can scroll back here. So you got username, password, default gateway, time zone, NTP server. And if you do show NTP, make sure that the NTP is synced, as well as make sure that you can ping out to the internet. Alright, as our last verification, that's trying to hit the web interface. So here we have a shortcut to LM-ICE2 with the IP of 32103. Since we're using Firefox, we're just going to need to accept certificates. At the login page, log in using the same admin account that we created. And if your installation went successfully, you should be able to log in, and you just get a warning that you're currently running the evaluation copy since we haven't really had any licenses installed. So let's say OK. With the warning if the license will be expired in 120 days. And here we're at the default dashboard page of the ISE web interface. You might also get a Setup Assistance wizard. If you don't want to go through that, you can click on Ask Me Again and click No. And at this point, your ISE server is up and running. The status should be green and it is ready for us to configure it. Before we wrap up our video, I just want to show you how to perform the installation using the ISO for those of you who decide not to use the .ova. I mean, you can always go back to our previous ISE video 1.2 or 1.1 and 1.2 that we did the ISO installation, but just to kind of keep them in the same video here, even with for ISE 1.3, let me go through that process real quick. I mean, we're not going to go through the whole process since that can take another hour. So far we have our ISE 1.3 ISO uploaded to our data store. So if you click on Browse Data Store, you see it right here, ISE 1.3 image. So if you right click on your ESXi server and click on New Virtual Machine, we're going to choose Custom. And for the name, let's just call it ISE 3 or LM-ISE3. I'm going to pick the same data store, click Next. You can see that here, since we are doing everything manually without the .ova, we're going to have to start specifying additional parameters. The first one here is the virtual machine version. We'll leave it as version 8. For Linux, we'll use Red Hat Enterprise 64-bit, Linux 6. For the number of virtual socket and core per socket, let's just do 2 by 2. Click Next. Memory, we can start out with 4 gig, and this is something you can increase over time. You just have to continue to monitor the hardware or resource usage on your server. For the number of network interface card, as you saw, the .ova comes by default with 4 NICs. If you plan to only use just one, then we can just have one here defined, but you can just keep adding if you need more, up to 4. Make sure you do adapter E1000, and then we'll drop it into appropriate VLAN. For the SCSI controller, we'll leave a default VMware Paravirtual. We definitely want to create a new virtual disk. The disk size should be minimum, even for the eval, of 200. But you also have an option to do thin provision, so it doesn't take the whole lot of your disk space in production. Again, we do prefer using thick provision, but thin provision is also supported now. Keep going. That will leave at default. Click Next. Let's edit the virtual machine before completion. Before you click Continue, let's review what you just configured and make sure it's accurate, and click Continue. Here you can pick and choose what to do. We can remove, for example, the floppy disk drive, remove. Now for the CD, DVD, we need to make sure we point it to our ISO file. So click Browse, Data Store, find the ISO, click OK, connect on Power On, finish. You can see the virtual machine is created fairly quickly, and we can click Power on the machine. Okay, so let's take a look and see what it looks like. The first thing you have to do is to specify the boot option. For the most part, you will pick one, which is Cisco Ice installation using keyboard and monitor. 1 and enter. So as you see that now that we've gone through the .ova installation, it actually looks a little bit different. It looks like with the ISO, it starts off with the operating system installation as opposed to the .ova. It looks like the OS has already been installed for you, and then you get put directly into the setup prompt. But for here, you still have to go through some system installation, and that's one main difference between the ISO installation and .ova installation. That's the ISO actually takes longer. But the sacrifice that you make with the .ova while you save time is the larger file size, and that you have to upload it in real time while you perform the VM installation. So at this point, there's not much you can do. You're just going to have to wait until you get that setup prompt, which is the same from that point forward when compared to the OVA installation. And since we're not going to be using the third node for our ISE deployment, I'm just going to go ahead and kill the installation. I just want to show you the process of installing ISE with the .iso. Go ahead and power that off. And as a quick reminder, once you have your ISE server installed, if you haven't done so already, Don't forget to create a DNS records for your ISE nodes when you're trying to resolve it. So it's trying to do a ping lm ISE. We've got ISE 1. You can see that it's resolvable and pingable, as well as ISE 2. That's also resolvable and pingable. And this is very crucial since the node names will be referred to throughout the deployment. And this should wrap up our video on ISE 1.3 VMware installation. You can visit our website to view an extensive list of our lab videos and sign up to get access to additional lab contents. Thank you for watching LabMinutes.com, and I'll see you guys in the next videos.